Educating, informing, serving. Fact TV, keeping government honest.
It's 6:02. We're in the lower theater. This is a joint board meeting for the town of Rockingham, Bells Falls Village Trustees, Saxon River Village Trustees. There is a Zoom link on the agenda that was posted on the website. So anybody's familiar with that, just go to town of Rockingham and look up agenda minutes, and it's right there, and you can just click on the link. That being said, I'd like to call this meeting to order. And I'd like a motion to approve the minutes of November 2021, the last meeting.
I move to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
Second. Well, that was quick. Okay, motion been made to adopt or approve the minutes of November 30th, 2021. Is there any further discussion, corrections, omissions, deletions? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor would say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Additions to the agenda for routine administrative matters and or pressing matters that will require ratification of future meeting. I have none. Scott?
No, nothing.
Anyone else on the board? Seeing none, we can move right along to public comment on items not on the agenda. It's 3 minutes per person, and just remind people that this is a comment period. It's not a period for discussion on a comment you're making. Thought Elaine Cliff was supposed to be on here.
I'm still adding people as they.
Oh, okay. She had some comments, public comments. Let's see if she's got a minute, see if we can get him on there.
I don't see anybody else. Hang on, people coming on.
Scott, you want to go into the manager report while you're,
Sure, we're still waiting on.
while we're trying to get people on?
Yep. There's nobody else waiting. So she said she was definitely doing Zoom.
Well, she said she's going to Zoom, so I don't
Okay.
see her here in the audience, so. We can go back to public comment. So let's move on to the manager report, keep the meeting going.
Sure. So I'm going to give you a couple of handouts as we get into some other agenda items. Michael Stack and give me some information that he's proposing with the crew that's working on just an input or suggestion for 66 Atkinson. So when we get to that item, I'll hand that out. David asked for some clarification on just lot coverage or just some basic concerns about what might be able to go into the actual lot itself. So I brought copies of the lister's card just to show you what the square footage of the prior building was. And it's a little hard to give you a direct comparison item to item, only because of anything that anybody proposes now, they're going to have more requirements with things like screening and parking and some of the other types of aspects that might impact your lot coverage. But you can certainly see when I hand out the lister card based on what was there previously, how many square feet was in the old building. The other thing that people had asked, our water guys had asked, they're going to actually start flushing, and we're going to be posting on the village website for starting to flush our water mains and hydrants and stuff. So we're going to start that week of the 4th of April. We'll be going on to the 29th. Typically when that happens, we'll get calls, concerns, questions. So just for people not to be too overly upset about that as we go forward, if that's just normal course of business. With that being said, and then the last thing is we're working with trying to get Heather on here as I'm talking to you. A person that's going to be coming in to help us with some of our personnel issues. I know I've talked to both boards about some of the issues that we had when we had combined positions and some of the things that we were missing. And so with bringing this person on, she's got a post of about 25 things that I want her to start working on. So she's going to be working on those, and I'll bring some of that back to the boards as we go forward, just so you have an opportunity to see the things that we're trying to work on. and update just issues that, quite frankly, because we had a combination position, was somewhat overlooked and somewhat not up to date. So with that being said, I think we're ready to move forward.
Does any of the board have any thing to say at this point? Before, yeah, wait.
I just wanted to remind Scott on the village side that could you just remind the water department when they start flushing, if they can continue to get the flows with.
So check on the
For
flows
the
on the
hydrants,
hydrants,
so
yeah.
when we continue with the hydrant project that we started in the fall.
Yeah.
The painting, we'll have the updated colors.
Yeah.
For the caps and stuff,
Okay,
you know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're
Yeah.
talking about.
'Cause
We have to
that's-
keep
that's-
track of that anyway, just for ISO reporting, and
Okay,
we'll make sure we keep track of that.
we'll probably pick that up again in the spring here or sometime along. LIL.
No one else? Seeing none, let's move on to the agenda, and if someone comes with public comment, we'll break for that. First item is the update on the reappraisal, and we have our lister crew here. There is a letter and information in your packet, for those of you who picked it up. Those who don't, as the process has been, it's usually stuck at the Bellas Falls Police Department, Fire Department. Can't miss it, right in front, they're locked up, you can get your current thing, so. Mr. Noble, you have the floor.
Well, I came with several issues for you folks. That was not the one I was gonna start with, but I can continue. I first wanted to thank both boards for the support that you guys have given us in the current transition that's taking place in the lister's office. You know, we did a lot of advertising, campaigning to get listers to people to sign up for the office. It's very hard. The state of Vermont's having trouble with that. I can say that we were very successful, and so my first purpose is to introduce you to the two new listers, who I'm sure you may not know them personally, and I invite you to come to our office to meet them. But over here, I have Mike Stack. Mike Stack has been in the financial analysis business for his entire life. He is a certified financial analyst. And over here, I have Tad, and use the word Tad, not Todd. Tad, Jesse Diedrich. He is a former fee assessor or appraiser, and he has done 14 towns in the state of Vermont as reappraisals. He is a student from the Institute of Appraisers. We are currently transferring his credits into the assessor's positions with the state. So we expect a lot of changes. We're going to let you know as we go along. That's part of our mission. Our mission is to change the office quite a lot. It's already changed in 2 weeks. And those changes I'll report to you later because they're ongoing, but already productive. Increased production of our department substantially by using some new, Scott says, electronic devices. Which we think will improve our efficiency and hopefully cut the operating costs. So I'm leaving you with that. Except for one thing, today is an exciting day for Paul. It's the remaining lister who is worried about how the transition could take place. I watched these guys. I think they think I ignore them, but I don't. And I kind of keep score. And I measure score against, are we making mistakes? And when we do, the box tells us it doesn't work. That doesn't happen very often, so be patient if it does. But I will tell you that as of this morning at approximately 4:12, I can tell you our department in 2 weeks from a debt startup is back to where we were on March 1st. We can do everything we did before, and we're doing it more efficiently. Presto to these two guys who do nothing but bend over their desk, study, and push buttons. So that's that. Now, the reappraisal question that you have, Scott, you want me to talk about that?
Yeah, everybody got a copy, just a brief.
This is a brief outline of what we have accomplished and not accomplished. We started to look at a partial reappraisal of the town because we were getting warnings from the numbers that we were gonna be demanded to do a full reappraisal. That is called a partial, our repair was called a partial reappraisal. We were doing that because we knew we were gonna go through this personnel transmission. And what we wanted to do was give ourselves a year or two breathing room before we had to do a full appraisal. It turns out that a partial will not solve the problem as we saw in the numbers. It will not, because a partial has certain rules. And if we followed the rules, what would happen is we would fix, play with the term CLA. We can fix that. But if we do that, we totally destroy the COD, which means in this case, lower income taxpayers would be injured, and we didn't want to do that. So what we did was cancel the reappraisal completely. We notified the state, all the numbers have returned to last year's, except for anything that's been added in the form of construction or changes. Those come along with the normal thing, but we're not going back. We're not going to try and fix it this year. We're going to wait for a year. And the reason for the wait, which was kind of encouraged as we went forward, we saw that the problems we were having with our numbers were in 2019. Well, next year we drop 2019 from the study and move up to 2022. In 22, our sales we project will be lower. And that some of the problems that we have will be erased strictly by dropping that 2019 year. That's where we are. That's about all I can say. Now, this decision was made by this board, not the previous one. These two guys worked very hard on this thing to analyze the numbers. So you can thank both of these guys for a real, I'd say, 3 days of torture, trying to catch up to where we were with no background to understand it. So they know if you need any questions, I think between the three of us, we've got it covered.
Sir, or Scott, there was some discussion on the board level here about Great River Hydro contract. When we unfortunately have to look at that or favorably look at that?
Well, we started some initial conversations and Paul has started some conversations with our special consultant on that project. And so they advised us to wait and come back and talk to him later on in the spring or early summer. There's still some other statewide efforts that are ongoing. So we're waiting for him. And I think Paul's been in touch with him pretty much every 3 to 4 weeks just to sort of touch base. So as soon as he gives us the green light, we'll sit down and have a conversation and probably have to have a little conversation out of public session about strategy and what their input might be and thoughts on how we go forward with that. So he just at this point just told us it's too premature and it's not right for us to jump into. So
When does the current contract expire, you know?
I believe the current 5-year rollover is at the end of 23. I believe. Yeah.
Oh, it's 23.
Yeah.
Okay, we have time.
I can tell you where we are as of yesterday. I talked to Mr. Sansucci yesterday with the same question. Well, where do we stand? Because he's been working on it in a different direction for 2 years. And what it is this hydro is not a freestanding, self-supporting thing. It relies on every power plant on the river. So his analysis is for, I think, 14 different places. We're kind of last on the list because of our agreement. We intend to have a plant visit and a new scene inspection in September. And we have vaguely heard from the power company, but only on one subject of what we call personal property. They have not challenged our values yet, although they have done it in other plants on the river. As Scott said, Sansucci said, don't, we demanded, we've already told them we will not do anything until we do another appraisal of that plant. Because he has just handled 3 others and he knows how the power company comes at it. And he says, if you really want to tell them, I'm looking at the plant again. And here's what we see. And the problem is, they've changed the way they're going to run this thing. It's gone to run of the river, not a power. Means they're going to generate power all the time, but they won't get all the bonuses for holding the water back and then using it only when you turn on too many lights. That changes their cash flow situation, and that's how we value the plant. It's how much money they can make. It's possible they can make the same amount and maybe a little more. We want to know that before we sit down and decide what kind of a deal we're going to end up with. That's where we are as of yesterday.
Has any questions?
Oh, that's great to get the update. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys. Yeah, appreciate it. All right, number 2, and we also waiting for, review the ARPA public input projects. I
Some
don't
of
see
that-
anybody-
I'm gonna ask Gary maybe if he can come up and sit a little
Gary,
closer up this
okay.
way, because he'll be part of this. I'm also gonna hand out some
Some of you may have
information.
gotten this sheet from Point Associates, and it was sent to everybody that was on at the meeting. So it gives you a breakdown of some of the stuff that we're, Gary will probably found on. Right. In case anybody's, Coming around, Scott has some other paperwork and a further breakdown that we looked at the other day, except in the color schemes to it, and so Gary will kind of touch on that.
Then these guys would be
If
jealous.
we can make it
You know
feel
that.
Hey, Gary, I guess you got it. Might as well take off.
Okay, so the ARPA program recommendation is community input, building consensus around projects. And then that input that goes to the boards, the final allocations are up to the board. So all of this information, all of the work that the community is doing with you is to provide that advisory report to you at the end of May at your joint board meetings. The program began with a review of the community visit and the goals from the community visit and that vision. And folks at the meeting brought up some other items. Conditions, of course, have changed since that community visit was pre-COVID. And folks brought up some issues they thought were missing from those goals. And then we looked at the ARPA funds available to each board and broke it to groups to talk about it. So the minutes that are in your packet kind of review what each group had to say about it, about the projects in those categories, the basic feelings about what was important in those areas. And the consulting team took those projects, and if you'll turn to the third piece of paper in your packet, they took the projects and broke them out by whether they were going to the Bellows Falls Village Board to allocate funds as recommendations for projects for the ARPA allocations, or the Town of Rockingham Select Board, or the Village of Saxons River Board. And then within those allocations, broke them up into the vision areas, the three primary vision areas in the community visit, plus the couple of others that came up during that first public engagement session. So those were the infrastructure and transportation, community development, building rehabilitation, workforce, and outdoor recreation. From here, the planning office and the development office are going to go through the projects and check off alignment with the town plan. And we're going to add some information about if the projects are short-term, so can be completed within a year, medium term, 1 to 3 years, or long-term, 3 to 10 years or longer. That information is going to be compiled by the consultants, who are also going to add information about project readiness. And then they're going to put all that together into a format that's easy to conceptualize, so that all of the things we're considering are laid out in a easy to grasp form, clearly delineated, which are Bellows Falls, which are Rockingham, which are Saxons River. And on the April 13th meeting, you can see the description on your first page, how it'll be broken out. Each geographic area will separate into a different group and go through their projects and work on kind of a rating program. And so April 13th will really be focusing down on what the community feels is really important out of these projects. What's the impact they're going to have in these vision areas? And then the consultants are going to, Camoin Associates is going to take all that information after the April 13th meeting, do some follow-up if there's any questions on dollar value or investments or specifics about projects. There will be the opportunity to combine like projects. For instance, the projects are organized where there's overlapping items are all together. So say 3 different projects had the concept of docents participating in different town facilities, with historic facilities, or NGOs, like a Gristmill Museum and a Waypoint Center and a meeting house. So the opportunity to combine like projects and which will increase the impact of that project and reduce the number of projects that we're looking at. And then a final report summarizing all of those and identifying priorities will go to you folks before your May 29th board meeting, joint board meetings. And for projects, and then of course, as you go along, you have until 2024 to actually allocate the funds, although you could allocate them as soon as yesterday. So you'll make your decisions on those over that time period. A lot of projects, there's, I think, 56 projects at this point. So a lot, of course, won't get any funding from the ARPA program. And Camoin Associates is going to provide a table of different funding sources that would work for these projects. So we can all see what all other resources we have. And there is, over time, with the town plan and development office and planning office work, to do some strategic planning with other projects that aren't in ARPA, so that over 10 years we're not losing things that are important to the community. So that's kind of where we're at. Okay.
Anyone have any questions after having a quick perusal of the information in front of you? I noticed there's a lot of duplication in some of these things, and some stuff listed. Debbie and I just kind of run through this thing. The community center at TLR building is booked under building the Saxon River. I didn't know we moved the TLR building over there. So,
It's also in the village of Bells Falls and the town. We
Yeah.
put them in all 3.
so I get, some of the stuff might have to be worked on, which you and Chuck will probably filter out. So.
The same thing with 37 Main Street.
Yeah.
Gary, I just have a procedural kind of question. I've been reading through, how this ARPA funding works and stuff. And, they recommend that you have these community meetings. But are the community meetings going to decide anything?
They're going to provide advisory input to you folks for your decision making. The final decisions, I'm sure you're familiar with, or I hear Ray Masuko in the board trainings talk about your fiduciary responsibilities, the funding responsibility and decision making for each municipality is the boards.
Right, so we could decide to do something that isn't even here at all. Right?
Absolutely, yes.
I think it's important for the public to be aware of.
Yeah, so we've been very clear about that all along in these meetings. The consultants said it, Scott said it, I said it at the public engagement meeting, and we'll all continue to repeat those.
Are all
pieces.
these things actually qualified for ARPA funding? I'm not so sure.
They can be. It depends on the approach that each municipality takes to the ARPA. There's a few different ways that you can.
I mean, I know it's been unclear what was going to be approved and what wasn't, but I think they finally settled that.
Yes, so the rules are final, but you have choices on how you choose to which category you choose to use the funds under changes the compliance requirements, and some of them are more restrictive than others. There is one of the methods is totally unrestrictive of how you spend the funds.
In the final guidance, Bonnie, they highly recommended that you follow a public process and that you document that process. And have it
Oh, I
available.
know.
So I think there's going to be a lot of follow-up and audit when these funds are finally expended and, go through some sort of a follow-up process. So I think that this energy and this time and making sure that we document all these activities and the public outreach is going to be.
Oh, absolutely.
Very
I'm not
important,
questioning that at all. I'm going to take the webinar next week on, all the finer points of this.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of detail still on this program.
Anyone else have any question?
Just a comment that we also have the authority, if we want, to turn our funds to a larger municipality. I mean, in Saxon's River, we could decide that a portion of the fund should go to a general Rockingham project. That's a comment.
Okay, what's the deadline by which these projects have to be completed?
The projects don't have a deadline to be completed by. The
26
funds
is
have a
fine.
deadline by when they have to be spent.
Okay, so 2026 they have to be spent by
The
then.
funds have to be spent, the project does not have to be complete.
Right.
So your ARPA funds can leverage other funds and pay, they could be seed money, 10%, 30% of a project. And those have to be expended by 2026.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I got a question.
Yeah.
Seeing we got Gary here, you just kind of, so seed money for future grants. What do we have as a village or town for that right now?
Could you say that differently?
So I know of a neighboring town who's gonna take a certain, almost half of their ARPA funds. And they're gonna set it aside into a pot for future grant, for acquisition of future grants of various types.
Gotcha. So,
Well, you kind of
yes,
just said.
I understand that. the
So my
Alex.
question is, what do we have currently? If we weren't sitting here talking about ARPA and you needed funds for, grants coming up, what do you have for that?
So there's funds that we will budget sometimes.
Yeah.
And then if there aren't funds budgeted, there's between this between $400,000 and $500,000 in a development fund that's allocated $100,000 to housing revolving loan funds and $400,000 to business revolving loan fund requests. And the select board can choose to use some of those funds to match grants. The purpose of the fund is economic development. So as long as the activity, the funds are going towards economic development, meets the fund purpose. There is a fund balance that's not in the general fund that I believe is prudent reserve and doesn't have the authority to be spent in a given year. I'm not really sure on that.
Well, they have to be appropriated, so the boards would have to make decisions on how they want to appropriate those funds.
Village doesn't have any of that.
We don't have reserve funds for capital, so we have articles periodically where you'll vote for like the meeting house and you'll have an appropriation and that'll go towards a specific purpose on an article. But we don't have a general reserve for capital.
Designate fund, pieces of fund balance could be used for this.
Lots of ways to do it, right?
Gary, could you also, just so to add more confusion to this thing, for those people who weren't able to go to those ARPA meetings or planning or running committee, the state ARPA funds and the federal ARPA funds are two separate pots, I think, is.
Yes, sure. So a portion of the ARPA funds from the federal government that were allocated to the states have been allocated to us, to municipalities, but there's also a much larger chunk that the state is using to run a multitude of programs. And so, for instance, there's water programs and sewer programs that the state is using their ARPA funds for. So one of the things they said to think about is, if there's state ARPA funds for the program, probably better to apply for those than to use your municipal ones and use the municipal ones to leverage programs where you don't have the other funding for. And you could, to your question, Wade, you could allocate some ARPA funds into a seed fund for development projects or for whatever you wanted, really, to match grant. Well, the problem, so if you use the method that's unrestrictive for ARPA funds, it's what you would have to set up a seed fund, then you could match federal grants with it. If you're using it for one of the set categories like water, sewer, or broadband, you cannot match. It's federal money, and you cannot match federal grants with it.
With federal money.
Be nice.
So, I mean, we have 3 projects, just for example, Wade, 2 from the village, 1 in water, 1 in sewer, and then the village of Saxon River also has a project in the state ARPA review right now. And we'll hopefully hear about that in April. And then there's another round of federal community development funds, which are basically the old earmarks from the, they've reinstituted that process. So Congressman Welch's office just put out a solicitation this week for asking for another round of projects. They did that last year as well. So we'll probably try to participate in that as long as they're continuing to do those. And so all of those are sort of sources outside of the traditional, like we talked about. So we'll keep on trying those things as well.
Okay, anyone else have any questions to further complicate the issue? The other thing too is that there are projects currently in the pipeline, as Scott just mentioned, the Village Waterworks out in Saxon River and others. So those are, you can dump extra money into do. So it all depends on, as Gary said, which fund you want to dip into first and save the other funds for something else that you may want to do somewhere down the line. So and our planning committee will probably cipher some of that stuff out during these meetings.
Which is why they give us until 2024 to dedicate the projects, even if we don't spend the money, but we dedicate them by 2024. So that way we have time to know whether or not we're going to get money from the state ARPA money for water, wastewater projects. And then we can, the student has to kind of guarantee, but do we need to use that money for this project because we're not getting that money? I mean, just whatever has to happen. So you have time.
So there's a second cycle of the state funding in April of next year. So if we don't meet the cutoff this year's,
2 years to.
more
figure
than
it out.
likely those three projects go back into that next round. Maybe others. And so you have other bites of that same apple.
And that's really important. So just like the community input is really important. With this legislation, very different from all of the other pandemic relief funds where you have like 3 months by the time it gets to the state government, down through the administrations, to an application process, to a decision. 3 months to get the money spent by the deadline and the program, and very restrictive to how you could spend those funds. And this is years. They really want communities to provide input to the boards. They want communities to take their time and make well thought out and considered decisions. So, yeah.
Anyone else? Questions?
I have one more question.
Look like it? Yeah. Okay, let's
Yeah.
move on.
Wait, we have one more question.
Just on that 2024 deadline,
Right.
is that the beginning of 2024 or the end of 2024?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll look it up and send it to you. But
I think it goes to the date of the final, the April 1st, I think is the date when they did the final
Oh.
rule.
With the final
I
rule?
think
Yeah.
that's the date that they've been using,
So be, okay,
but
because that could come into play,
yes,
Yep.
certainly. So,
good to know.
Okay, we ready to move on to update the area-wide plan, I guess. Is Gary gonna run that? Don't run away yet.
don't run away mad, right?
Yeah, just run away.
Just run away.
There is a information in your packet, but for those who got it, there's a nice little picture here and write-up and all kinds of interesting information here. And make sure you get a chance to pick up your packet.
Part of this process is also important because we're getting into these grants and competitive grants. One of the things that they want to see is what kind of planning process have you undertaken, right? And then what are the results of that process, and does it feed into the grants then if you're trying to go after to accommodate those outcomes? So I know a lot of this looks like sort of futuristic, like planning for Disney World.
Like
There's a
purpose,
there's a real world application to it that does matter when we get into the nitty gritty of trying to compete. A lot of the grants that we're looking at, as we all know, are really competitive. So it's an important step in that process. So with that, I'll let Gary sort of fill in the blanks as to where we are.
So really, the Island District, under the Hill District, they're part of our designated downtown that's undeveloped. And in 1999, when we got our designation as a designated downtown, the downtown in Bellows Falls was kind of gap tooth. A lot of the historic buildings were in poor shape, and over 10 years, a big difference. Our downtown is well lauded as one of the more beautiful, historic, vibrant downtowns. And the island is part of the designated downtown, and no one is talking about that when they're describing the beautiful, historic downtown. So the post-industrial areas with manufacturing, mills, contamination, the Brownfields program has decades of experience in redeveloping these areas like the island, and the area-wide plan is their primary tool for figuring out how, not just the contamination piece, but what's best use of the properties, how to work through getting the actual redevelopment going. So the island has been underutilized, totally unutilized or abandoned properties for a while. Some of them have, there are probably, I think there's like 23 to 24 businesses on the island. So it's not that there's nothing going on there. It's just, there's a lot of land and buildings that are contaminated, underutilized. And so the area-wide plan, it looks at those environmental issues. So the first thing that these consultants did was get the picture of the environmental issues on the whole area, the island, under the hill, which ones had been addressed, which ones were unknown, which ones had been tested but needed more work. and presented that at a meeting, a public meeting last June to the community. And then they talked about the properties, what the ownership was, what the constraints, zoning, what you could do with them. And the community talked about the community visit, what types of visions we wanted to do, what we wanted to see. And so there were a series of 3 public meetings over 4 months, I think, so June to, 4 months, that went into the creation of this plan, and meetings with the property owners, the businesses, stakeholders, as well as the public meetings. And so the map that you see is the overview of what was chosen in these prioritization meetings. So the fact sheets that go along with it, that's the how do you get it done? What are the constraints? What needs to happen with the properties, right? So like someone owns them and then whoever owns them really has control of them. So we have all these ideas for the properties, and the owners participated in this plan development. But so then for each area, who are the owners? Who are the other stakeholders? What's the contamination issues? What's the what would it cost to redevelop it how we have it in this plan? What are the funding sources to redevelop it like that? And then what does that do to the tax base, right? So right now you have some empty properties that that don't provide anything to the tax base. If we do this redevelopment, what does that mean? Which is really important because there's a lot of public infrastructure that has to go along with this, right? I mean, the roads are kind of crumbling. There's no sidewalk. You know, walk along Island Street, there's about a 1 foot gap where you're rubbing shoulders with the, metal building that's peeling and sharp edges sticking out. So there's all that public infrastructure work to do. The water and sewer probably need some upgrades. There's the island is an island because it's a granite hunk that drove the river around it. And so the stormwater and sewer is not very deep there. It doesn't cover all areas. And so the cost of public infrastructure is balanced against the tax revenues, the increase in tax revenues that you can get from these developments. And so all of that goes into this report. And then when we go for funding, whether it's like the tax increment finance districts, they use that formula to allocate funds to public infrastructure. If we go to the Federal Economic Development Authority, they use these reports to fund public infrastructure. So this report is really a basis for us being able to have instructions for the redevelopment, but also to substantiate our case in the grant applications and the funding for this redevelopment. And that's kind of that's where we're at. The final report, like packaged report, with all of the citations and background and stuff, probably about a month away from packaging this up and having our contained report that we can send along with grant applications and other documents.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for Gary?
Yeah. Have you thought about priorities? I mean, obviously, you can't do all this at once. Do you have anything in mind in terms of what you might, attempt to manifest first?
Sure. Well, so ones that are easy to do in terms of ownership. So the train station, for instance, is a first step, and that ownership in July will be the town. So we have site control, and it's easy to work through that. Some of the projects are where there's owners that are interested in the projects, and they're developer, like the Adams Grist Mill with the Bellows Falls Historical Society. They're well along the way and have planned for decades to have a working grist mill museum there. So that's an easy one to do earlier rather than later. The mixed use residential involves a lot of public infrastructure, roads, private developers, probably 4 different owners of parcels. So that one's more complicated, and it doesn't mean we don't start on it now, but it means it will be years till it, we see physical evidence of the work. Kind of like the duck paddling under the water on some of them. You won't notice anything on those mixed-use residential projects for a few years. but-
So it sounds like, dealing with buildings comes from, then I see all kinds of streetscape stuff here. There's trails here and there, overlooks and amphitheaters and all.
Yes.
Do you think you're probably gonna get your buildings started or, whatever, before you go and address all that stuff?
Yeah, so the next step from here is a strategic planning process of the sequence, but some of them look like they might be simple, like, oh, here's a trail that goes around with a nice walk, but
Yeah,
they
I don't
actually,
think it
you
will
can,
be, that's why I'm asking.
well, but you can see it crosses the railroad tracks in a couple of points. So to do that could be a couple of years of working through rights of ways. What's the railroad going to be comfortable with in terms of people crossing on a trail and not getting killed? So some parts look simple, but can have pieces that take a while. Things like having lights over the canal, and the canal walk would be easy, but it involves working with Great River Hydro for working in their air rights above the water. The pathway along the canal, that's partly on their property, some of it's town property. And then the canal walls is certainly all Great River Hydro property, and so the aesthetics of those. So some of those simpler ones may take more years than some of the ones that look more complicated.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I see when I look at
Yes.
it. That's
Yeah.
what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that will be next after this report is doing some of that sequencing and timelines and.
Anyone else? Going once, twice? Going down to Article 4. Update 66 Atkinson Street issues. What do we do with the property? Here we go.
So this is a little bit of an update since we last spoke. We did take down a building. We worked with some folks to do some archaeological work. They want to come back and do some additional work in the spring. We're going to work on timing for that so we can try to accommodate that. And then we still have to do some final grade and seeding on the property. So that'll be coming later on in the fall, or not in the fall, rather later in the spring. As you've seen, it's settled in a couple spots, and there's some places where we got to bring in some fill. So we'll make sure that we get the lot level. And then after that, the question is going to be going forward, what type of development or proposals or other types of input would be sort of a process for consideration for redevelopment of the site. We are working with the school on updating the crosswalk there because there's been quite a bit of concern about the pedestrian crossing at that location. So the school is buying us 2 sets of the rapid flashing beacon setups with some additional lighting, and we'll be working in concert when those come in. We'll actually then, the town will do the install, so you'll see some improvements there, hopefully with the visual pedestrian crossing at that one intersection. And we'll hopefully make that improvement sometime later this spring once those new rapid flashing beacon signs come in. So you'll see some physical changes at that intersection. But then there's a question of there's a lot of zoning issues there. The lot itself has a lot of constraints. We're all somewhat aware that you can see I've put on the back of this, Chuck put together some issues that will be a concern going forward in terms of setbacks, lot area, coverages. And then I just included in the information that we just distributed around, just what the previous square footage was on the old building, just for comparative purposes, so you can sort of see what the old calculation was based on the basement and then the 2 floors. of the old building to see how that covered the lot, but understanding that, again, any new proposal would ultimately, if there's some building or other type of use there, would have to be some consideration to DRB for things like parking, site improvements, screening, those types of things. So this is really a rough idea of what it could do. And then Mike Stack had just dropped by a proposal that a group of folks have been working on. And I think Mike's stick around. He's still here. So if he wants to, maybe he could come and just give you a little bit of information. And I just circulated that as well. So
Sure, would you like me to speak to this?
absolutely.
I'm used to standing and delivering because that's what Chairman Noble makes us do on the listers. That's the way I'll approach this. So I'm here as a private citizen and I'm here representing Bells Falls Trades. Jeff Dunbar's on the board. I see Sean Murphy's here. He's one of our partners. And basically, Bells Falls Trades is a nonprofit in town that's focused on creating work-based learning experiences for the students and basically partnering between the school, the students, and the local companies and trying to integrate those and create opportunities. 70% of our high school graduates 4 years down the road don't have a college degree. So that's 70% of the population we believe could use some help in terms of future direction, et cetera. So with that being said, we're proposing community garden in the YMCA lot. And Scott has laid out there's a lot to be resolved before this happens. But I felt like it was worth coming to the board to present this proposal. And excuse me, basically, I think of the proposal in two ways, and that is there's the tangible piece and then there's the intangible piece. The tangible piece is pretty straightforward. We're basically offering the town $75,000 over for a 10-year lease on the property to construct a community garden. And we could go through any of the details that you want to on that. But then to me, the really exciting piece and the conversations I've had with people, I see Marcia Stern is online. She's the coordinator of the existing community garden in Bells Falls. Sean, the list is long and the number of volunteers that we've already collected for this effort is pretty impressive. But again, the intangibles really are the learning, the education experiences that we can create for our students, whether it's in the designing and the landscape architecture work that will go into the project, the actual building, whether it's benches, raised beds, etc. And we're not in a rush to get this done. I mean, I'd like to have it done yesterday, but the reality is the way we're going to approach this is we're going to try to maximize the opportunity for education for young people. So that's going to be the main driver. And then obviously, unfortunately, that historic building had to come down. But now that it's down, I don't know how you feel about it, but when I drive by that lot, I think a green space there, a community space, would be a real nice addition to the community. And why do I say that? I mean, we've all been pretty isolated over the past couple of years. To create an opportunity for people to come together and that kind of environment and the educational piece that would wrap into that. That plus the reality is there's people in town that rent, etc. They don't have access to land. So giving them a little plot of land, for their own little garden or whatever, I think it would go a long way again, in that intangible bucket. So I've attached, the who we are. If anybody has any questions, happy to take them and address them. One thing I will say is, I've just recently retired back to my home in Saxons River, and I have been overwhelmed with the support that we've gotten with Bells Falls Trades, how open the high school has been to use us again as a kind of a lubricant between the school, the business community to facilitate these opportunities for students. I've been away for quite a few years and I've watched things close up in town and go away. But the one thing I will say is the piece that I see here that's still quite powerful
is the work ethic, the spirit of the community. And I've been really, really impressed with that. I'm very encouraged that we can really tap into those principles and those values that have been here for a long time and use those to benefit our students or our young folks. So again, if there's any questions on the proposal, happy to answer them.
I'll throw something on the table here and then go to. You realize, of course, the town is looking to recoup the funds that we spent to demolish and the property's still not finished, but it runs in the vicinity of $80,000 to $85,000 we spent between the village and the town to take that down. So I think we're looking to sell that property to a tax entity that's going to pay taxes on it and recoup. Even if we sell it at a discounted rate, we get some tax money back on it over the year, and we'll eventually get paid back for what we spent. That's the thinking along the select board line. The town actually owns that property now, so the final decision will come from the select board. But one question I also have is the plot on Church Street where the house was taken down. Did the town own that one too, that lot?
I think so, because that was on, right, there's,
Because that's on Church Place, just up the street from Central. That might be another application point. And I also saw in the paper, the Parks Place is considering a solar array there. And I think that would be detrimental to the area. I don't think anybody wants to be driving down that road and looking at 50 solar panels staring them in the face when they're in traffic. That's my thinking on it. A little bit of history. Several years ago, Whitney Blake had a garden, a public garden up there, community garden, that died on the vine. There's one, used to be, I know it's still in operation, but at the Village Barn. Do they still run that one up there?
there is some stuff up there,
There's some there.
right, seasonally.
And what happened with one at the high school? Is that still going on up there?
You're talking about the one that was in the,
Yeah, the island.
on the island, when our last foods teacher just retired, she was the one that was running it, so the raised beds are still there, but we've got some ideas to possibly upgrade that if necessary.
Because they also did raised beds at the middle school, and they tried them at TD Bank down there, and we got a lot of complaints about how they weren't taken care of properly. So that, just open up the discussion. Anybody, Jake, you had your hand up, so.
Well, I was just anxious to have you explain that this is a select board decision, and that the fact is that the town and the village have money invested in this property. It'd be nice to get that back. I think as far as the community gardens, I've served on the school board for a number of years, and we have a garden at the middle school. We have a garden at Central. We have a garden at Saxon's River as well. And I'm not sure about the Saxon's River garden, but I know that the student participation in the gardens at the middle school and the Central school, I would have to turn very disappointed. I know there's been a teacher or teachers at both schools, and they worked on these things diligently. But I think the record of getting children involved has been disappointing. It could be different in Saxon River, I'm not sure.
I can speak to that. Saxon's River works great, but it's the adults. I mean, the time for gardening is in the summer, and the kids are usually not right there. So it's a great garden, and the kids eat out of it in the fall, but it's thanks to, I think maybe 4 adults who call for volunteers and help. I do have one other thought. We have Julie Warmaservi, who's technically in Westminster, but she's the internationally known garden architect who made the village park in Saxon's River design. And I love the idea, what you said about tangible and intangible benefits. I wonder if she would be a good partner for you.
We did actually also already secure Scott Wonderly, who also
great.
was involved
Yep.
with,
Yep.
He's in the list of volunteers at the end there.
Right.
But I do see Jody Hauser on the screen here. And I spoke with her, and I don't know if she can pipe in, but I know that she's actually weaving into her curriculum at the elementary school, the project learning, and, you know, I totally sympathize with some of the thoughts in terms of this just become just another garden that, and it's possible, you know, it's very possible. But I do think from the standpoint of the schools, whether it's the elementary school, which is right next to it, the middle school, which is just up the street, and the high school, there's a lot more that we can hang off of this than just growing vegetables. I mean, there's a lot of educational opportunities. And to be very honest, Bells Falls Trades is going to be involved in a lot of projects going forward. This is just one, and the focus being to try to maximize the educational opportunity out there. So anyways, I probably have said enough, but if anybody has, go ahead.
Okay, let's take some questions from the board first, and then we'll go to the public for any comments from them. So, Bonnie, you got your hand up first, and then we'll go to Rick.
And then Steph.
Stefan's got a question, so.
Okay, I'd just like to chime in with some personal experiences. When I lived in Baltimore, Maryland, I created a lot of school gardens, worked with a lot of schools. When I first got out here, I revived the school garden at Putney Central School. And I understand what you're saying. The kids aren't there in the summertime. And I also know what teachers go through trying to fit that into the curriculum, get the kids out there and do that. And it is challenging. I think that this might go better because you have Bells Falls Trades kind of paying attention to it. It doesn't just fall on the back of like a couple of volunteers and an overworked teacher, which is what I saw happen in city schools all over Baltimore. Very frustrating. I started a program called Learning Through Growing and worked with a couple teachers, and we really developed an actual science and math program for the kids that would carry over into the summer. So they would be expected to sort of do a equivalent of a little bit of summer school, working on their garden project. I can lay out the details for somebody if anybody's interested, but it was a little complicated, and it involved getting the student plots connected with the farmer's market and teaching their kids about growing for market and what's involved in that and so forth. A lot of different ways you can work this in and really make it part of the teacher's curriculum, not just, you know, a sort of extra thing you're trying to cram in, you know, during what would have been nap time or something. So I would love to work with you guys if you're short of cash.
Okay, Rick.
To the finance question that Jigs, you brought up here, the $75,000 lease payment, wouldn't that cover most of what the town village invests?
It would be what happens after the lease runs out. You keep extending it for someone's bought the property, you're gonna get taxes every year, regardless of whether it's a lease or not.
Right, but 12 years of income and also the taxes on that space are going to be, so little can be built there. What kind of tax revenue will be generated from a building that has to sell?
Well, the other thing you have to look at too is the effect it has on the neighborhood now. I know Bonnie's property has been affected from the house that was just taken down next to her house. So it also affected Doyle's property, which is next door. So those two properties increased in value, so we got taxes from those. And Gary Fox on Cherry Hill had a 3-decker taken down, which he bought for little or nothing, and it enhanced his property. So there are benefits that to try and sell it, and those properties are not sold for what we actually paid to have them taken down. So over the years, the taxes have brought it back to where we broken even, I think. I'd have to sit down with the numbers. So that's the plan there. Stefan?
Yeah, I just want to make some comments. I floated one of my opera ideas at the trustees meeting. First of all, I like Michael in reference to 66 Atkinson. I like the idea of an open green space there. And what I talked about, even though it's not within the authority of the Board of Trustees, we do have a financial interest there. I think, and I suggested at the time, a park all right? And I like the idea of the community gardens off the hip, just seeing this tonight. $75,000 with a lease. Depending on how you structure that lease, you know, the town would get some monies. It'd be a retained open green space. The garden idea, I like that also. You can maybe combine that with maybe like a community park and the garden idea, but also with the lease and the town owning it, you can pretty much govern what happens there over the next decade. And that would probably most likely enhance that value of that property. And if whoever's sitting here 12 or 10 years from now can decide what they may want to do with it or continue on. The other comment I suggested in reference to the island was and I know it's a property that people may have other ideas for, but you look at the Roberts Paper Mill property. The town's probably into that for at least 250,000. There's some money that BFADC had borrowed. The hopes there too, I would assume, would be to make sure or try to get all of that money back. My thoughts are, I've gone to several communities and events, and there's something that we don't have in this community that they do have. And what they have is a beautiful common area. You can look at Lebanon, New Hampshire, Lebanon, Connecticut. You can look at even Cavendish, Vermont has a beautiful green common area with a gazebo. You know, that leads to opening up to bringing people into your community, people from your community also getting involved in what's going on. You could have live concerts, farmers markets, crafts fairs, political events also, other public functions that would go on. I just don't see that piece of property at the moment. And I've talked with some other people too. They don't see it also selling for that kind of money there. Furthermore, getting into your Bellows Falls trades, I like the idea. I wish I had a better memory for the names. And Scott, we talked about it briefly at our trustees meeting, but we did have 3 or 4 kids, and I'm trying to remember what a couple of their names were, but I don't. I wouldn't call it an apprentice program, but they had worked with, at the time, I think it might have been, whether it been Ray Perry or Everett. What they did is they were high school kids that through some educational type thing, they spent time at the water plant. I think they may have spent some time at the sewer plant, but my memory doesn't hold that much for that. And what I thought was, you know, we're going to be in need of a couple of operators. If we had a couple of people who didn't go on to college, or a couple, you know, a guy or two, and these kids were pretty good at the time. When it rained or something, there was anything to do, they'd go out and they'd work with the town crew. But if we had someone that, for a young person that was graduating from high school, that wasn't moving on to the military service or furthering education, but hey, you know, I might like to go work at that water plant. I'm willing to get the education if we can get some means and ways, and maybe we'd have an operator in 3 or 4 years. I think it's I like what I've read just briefly here.
Thank you. Yeah.
And again, I like the green space idea on Atkinson Street.
Thank you. So anybody who has any interest or, you know, follow up on this with job chat, whatever, please contact me and we'll follow up on it for sure.
No, I was just gonna say quite a lot of what Stefan just said, that, I mean, it does, if it's a 10-year lease, I mean, it does give you that opportunity to utilize the space and
you are getting
before
money.
you sold, and we do get at least part of the money that's owed back to the town. And I do kind of like having that space open when you go and you see the school and the playground. I think it's also a safety issue for the playground. If kids are playing there, you're not behind that big building. You've got other eyes in the neighborhood on that playground. And I think keeping it open is a good for security as well. Yeah, and after 10 years, you can sell it.
Well, I think the community garden idea is great. On this property, I would really favor infill development, hopefully taxable. It's not to say that I don't like the community garden proposal. I would love to find an alternative place for it, or to look, you know, what other possibilities there are for 66 Atkinson Street. if we can find a developer to put in another building there, try that first, and if not, and after a couple of years, we found that there's no interest, then go in on something like this. But I think that this time, I prefer the idea of.
And I did have an interested property owner adjacent there that approached me, wanted to know what the town's going to do with it, and I haven't had any further conversation with the person, but I can pursue it and see if there's any interest there to take over, to buy the property.
I think if, Mr. Chairman, you could take a look at with the Paul and the Lister staff. That's a pretty, from the hip, if again looking at it, that's a pretty lucrative offer by Bells Falls Trades for a lease term, and still gives the town hands-on control of being the landlord, basically, of that property and the covenant guardian of that.
I was just gonna follow up on Elijah's comments, which I certainly am in favor of infill development. I think that if you look at the restrictions on that lot, right now, the ability to infill, we need to be realistic. And we could be sitting on that for 5 years before somebody buys it at a reduced cost versus having the opportunity to use it in a way that brings folks together in a positive way, still have the flexibility and the opportunity for perhaps zoning changes, the town evolves, the needs become clearer for what is necessary. Our schools are changing as far as number of kids and the needs that are there. 10 years from now, when the lease is up, that property will be different eyes, clearer eyes as to perhaps what the future best use would be. So I am on the board. I'm speaking, that's from a number of positions, but to be fair, I think that it does allow for some income to be there to alleviate a lot of what the upfront costs were, and then also provide a contribution that does have maybe not direct financial ties, but certainly is a contribution that 10 years from now, when we have a trade program that is thriving and there's going to be an economic payback that we don't realize today.
If I may, going forward, I see she's over there trying to listen and.
I wish we had microphones in this room. It's so hard.
Yeah, the only microphones, I'm just going there, the only microphones we have is those, so anybody wants to speak, please speak up a little louder so the people can hear you.
I
You can stand here for, ever since you started, you couldn't hear half of what you were saying.
Peter, if I'd like to somewhat reiterate what my colleague here said. That 75,000, I'm not, I like the idea, the upfront, that's the courtesy occurring. But that's gonna be a lot more than what you get as that sitting as a vacant lot. And then I was made aware of a lot in the community here for sale, and somebody told me the price of it. And I said to them, good luck. But from my institutional knowledge, we had a piece of property that the town and the village at the time had up on Red Light Hill. There was a fire. It may have been a fatal fire, unfortunately. I can't recall exactly. But the town and the village had come along through basically a similar process and gotten that property, made a substantial investment to bring it up to where it ought to be and to alleviate an eyesore in the neighborhood. Tried to sell it. What we ended up doing at the time was approaching both landowners on each side, opposite side of this property.
And that's why.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I got hit for that.
And I don't, nowhere near what we didn't get, nowhere near what it was that we had into it. Again, this idea here with your monies and the town being able to control it to an extent, working with a collaboration, communication, and cooperation, I think the way to go.
Right, Eric, you've had about 3 shots. Let's-
10 seconds.
All right,
That an area that, although I like community gardens and I would like to see them succeed, and I was an advocate for the one that put up on Hetty Green Park. My 10 seconds is, this is on Route 5. It's a massively busy commercial road. You're talking about exhaust fumes that are going to be incorporated in the garden of vegetables that people eat, if that's what we're looking at. And safety is a concern on that corner. It's a corner lot. And although adding, it looks great when it, now that it's open, I'm just greatly concerned about putting a community garden in that spot because it's a very busy road and there's a lot of diesel fumes. So that's my concern for health. Thanks.
anybody else on the board? No, go to the audience. If anybody, anyone out there want to speak?
Did you raise your hand?
Seeing none.
Jody is
Okay.
on.
Yeah, all right, go ahead.
So fast.
You could be quicker.
And I apologize for being late. I didn't get to hear the proposal. But the reason why we came down tonight was to talk about the lot on Atkinson Street. We'd love to see it be open. One of the things that's exquisite about that lot is the view from like the middle school. This is the biggest boulevard, I think, open boulevard in our town. And to have, you know, a large tree or a grove of trees there, and then a community garden between the trees and the playground. So there's actually a buffer between the traffic on the road. We know that as climate change happens, we need to have more trees. They help cool the city. They help cool our town. And that could make a place, an outdoor meeting place for people, a place for families, adults, you know, if there was gated between that and the playground, where parents or grandparents could watch children on the playground instead of being out in the middle of the bark mulch. In the heat of the summer is pretty hot out there. So that was the main thing I wanted to say. I know that you had something to say.
Yeah, Steve Crofter. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to emphasize that what Stefan said, basically that what I heard you say was that a green space has a social benefit that, you know, one of the things, our town has a whole lot to going for it, but there's not a town center in a way. And it's not like 66 Atkinson would be the center of town, but it is pretty central in some ways. It's central to a lot of neighborhoods. It's, you know, it's where the four-way stop is, you know, kind of thing. And just that it gives people a sense of identity. It would be another place. You know, we have the square, we have the island, we have the Great Falls. There's a lot we have scattered around, but this could also be another place that people identify with as, you know, this is part of what says Rockingham, part of what says Bellows Falls. And if you combine that with a place where, you know, whether it's two neighbors that meet and sit on a bench, or, you know, 20 people that get together to I don't know, have a discussion or sing folk songs in the evening, it doesn't matter what, it's just a place people can gather. And I think that's worth a whole lot. You know, it's not gonna put money in the town coffers directly from that property, but it is going to increase the value of the whole town. You know, it's gonna make more people, it's one more thing that makes this a desirable place to live. I just wanted to put that out.
You know, I know that I didn't think this was going to be about proposals tonight. I think clearly the select board needs to discuss this and make decisions.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I'd like to see us go on with the agenda so that we can.
We'll go on, I'm just trying to move this along, so, Mr. Murphy, you had a comment or two?
Are you right if I just talk from the school perspective?
Yeah, as long as you can tell loud enough so they can get picked up.
Yeah, so Mike approached me earlier this year and we've been talking about some really exciting ideas for our high school students. People are getting really excited. We sent out a letter and we're getting a lot of community response with a lot of great opportunities for our kids. And like Mike said, he's kind of supporting some programs that we already have. I think you were referring to some of our kids going and doing some shadowing. That's through our school to work program. We call it work-based learning, so kids can get credit for going and doing their job, or we'll give them internship opportunities, give them shadowing opportunities. This particular garden is going to in my mind, kind of tie the elementary school and the middle school to what we're doing at the high school. So these kids that go to Central who have some experience in the community garden that potentially our high school kids had a chance to help build, are going to see what that product was. They're going to go to the middle school, they're going to have access to it. And then when they come to the high school, they're already going to know about these opportunities for kids to access education outside of the classroom. And we have more and more kids that are really looking for those opportunities. And if we can train them up, we can put them to work, because there's plenty of jobs out there. And we find, just through talking to kids that we see around town, they're starting that process after they're done with high school. But if they could start that a year or 2 years sooner, then they've got their license, they've got that experience, and then they're contributing to the greater Bellsouth community even sooner. So, and that's honestly the way I drive to work every day, and it looks so much better without a building.
Right, Jody Hauser's had her hand up, so I'd like to recognize her. Thanks for her patience. Jody, you have something to say?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Please forgive me. I'm homesick with the flu, but it's really important for me to let you know that Central is just completing their first year of the Farm to School program, and we have had a coach for the gardens come every month to meet with a team of people, which would be myself. I'm the librarian at Central. Our nutritionist and kitchen manager, our 2 second grade teachers who are taking the gardens on as a project-based learning, and our phys ed teacher. And if you don't know what Farm to School is, the goal is to help students establish a lifelong positive relationship with food while supporting a more just food system. The strategies used through the Farm to School program achieve this shift are serving healthy food in schools, improving student nutrition, providing hands-on food systems-based learning opportunities, and developing meaningful relationships between community partners, schools, and students. Farm to School supports youth in connecting the dots of where their food comes from and how their food choices impact their body, the environment, and their communities at large. So I just really wanted to just kind of piggyback off of one of the select person's comments about the school having a garden in the past. This program actually builds time into the school curriculum, as far as there's time for students to work in the garden as part of their education. And the way project learning works is it takes cross-curricular subjects like math, reading, writing, and incorporates them into the garden. And so it's what we're doing in this first year is setting the stage for our gardens on the school grounds, but we really do need some more space. And the last thing I really want to say is that there was a concern about summer and the taking care of gardens, but we also have been incorporating summer programs through the 21st Century Funds, and our Farm to School grant, which is continuous, supplies a stipend for a coordinator, which is our nutritionist and kitchen manager. So she would be there in the summer to maintain the gardens, as well as do some camps with the kids that are coming for the summer camps and enrichment programs during the summer. So a community garden for us, the green space is, great and wonderful, and would really make our our Central campus feel so wonderful, but also the connection to the community that the students have, the green space for the students, the extra green space, which some of those students don't have, and the thought of going into a community garden and doing science with soil or composting and irrigation projects really would just support what we're doing at Central right now with Farm to School. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
All right, thank you. I think we're nearing the exhaustion point on this subject, but I'll take Carrie Kennedy, and then Priscilla. So Carrie, do you have something you'd like to add to that that hasn't already been discussed?
Sure, I just wanted to add, our support for that. Thank you, Jody, for all of your efforts. I too am homesick, so I apologize. And it just really is a fantastic opportunity to bring our students into the community and to see that connection to the high school. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you for listening.
Okay, Priscilla?
I absolutely love what I've heard from these people. But what I wanted to comment, which is a little different, is that several people said to me, I hate the fact that building had to come down. That's terrible. We lost a historical building. But they said to me, it opens up it kind of draws the school into the community. It makes the school seem more a part of the community. And so the openness, I would encourage you to please look at that and think about the openness. When you drive down that street, you see it open and you see it drawing in. And so Mike's proposal kind of adds to that, and my thoughts about it as far as drawing it in. I love that idea. Thank you for listening.
Okay, but just so you know, this will probably be on a future select board agenda, so you're welcome to come back again and put a little more input when we have some more time. We have 4 other items to go through tonight that could be rather lengthy, so I appreciate everybody that's made their comments this evening. So without further ado, I'd like to move on the agenda here. The next item is going to be the resolution, the declaration of inclusion. I think, Amy, you're leading this parade.
I am, and I'm very happy to be brief. I think this is a topic that gets introduced, but nothing happens tonight. Maybe we take it back to our own boards and see what they have to say and come together at another time. So the page I've passed out is made from the 2 sites at the bottom, the Vermont Declaration of Inclusion.org/background and the www.dlct.org. Diversity, equity, inclusion. Very briefly, after the death of George Floyd, a couple of people on the western side of the state, Bob Harnish and Al Wakefield, started discussing what they could do to counteract this vision of Vermont as the whitest state in the country. At least that's my take on their discussions. And Harnish, who I think is from Pittsburgh, came up with the idea of an actual statement which would be endorsed by the town. He saw this as a matter of economic development. And when Rick Cowan posted maybe 6 months ago, how can we reach out to people? How could we do what, for example, Rutland has done, welcoming people? I thought about this declaration. So the initial piece on the handout is the statement. Obviously, every board might decide to emphasize some pieces and not the other. It's basically a condemnation of racism and a welcoming statement with various ticketed points. I'm on the board at Parks Place. We started to discuss this, and a little to my surprise, I suppose I'm as clueless as the next person. The schools have done this work. The Y has done this work. Chroma has done this work. This is something that is happening around us. Governor Scott has issued a declaration for the state, but it seemed to me that it would be quite specific for our 3 boards to do it. So the intent, Vermont is a welcome community, invites all to bring families and friends as well as their talents and skills, a community of people who will treat them fairly, provide encouragement and support, will bring the full resources of the state, cities, and towns to ensure well-being and security. So I think that's enough of an introduction. If there are questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And I know Deb has done work on this with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns.
My board's well aware that I'm on the DEI committee that you reference here on the bottom of this document. I wasn't aware that of this particular writing this came directly off of their site, so.
This came off the Vermont Declaration of Inclusion.
Okay, and I had not seen that one.
I think
have-
it's a new site,
I think so,
honestly.
because I've seen the governors, I printed that one, I gave it a copy to Jigs, it's from May of 2021, when Governor Scott did proclamation of inclusion. I have some concerns over the language, because we're talking about, it talks about racism, but then it includes a lot of other subjects that are not racism, and it's not, it's, to me, that makes it not inclusive if you're not using the right terminology. But each board will have to make up their own mind, as you have said, and I have already previously in months before asked Scott to look into classes of diversity for our departments to take in the coming year, and that BLCT, my group, the DEI group, is still working on our recommendations that we'll bring forward to the LCT, and then they'll be able to start programming and available funding and things like that. So, so that other communities will be able to incorporate that in their trainings. So that's an ongoing process, and I know my group's not done it yet. We're meeting once a month on Mondays, at the beginning of the month, in order to get through this. And for us, it's a matter of, just like here, weaving all these people in different backgrounds and diversity of their own in order to be able to talk plainly and clearly and make sure that we are all welcoming. So that's part of the whole process. And so it's an opening of conversation that can go on for a while here too. Thank you, Amy, for your.
Jigs.
I just want to clarify. This is kind of a cold comfort type of a letter, right?
A cold comfort?
Well, in other words, it has no legal standing or anything
Correct.
like that.
It's a
It's
statement.
just a fuzzy, a cold comfort is kind of a business term, but it's a feel-good type of statement, right? I mean, it's not.
That's the intent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Because my feeling is, we serve on this board, many of us serve on other boards, and we have been through a period where inclusion and fair treatment and all is embedded in our beings. And I'm not saying everybody isn't, but I think I see the village operating under these principles, that we don't discriminate. And if we witness discrimination, we would do something about it. So I just didn't want this to, I wanted to be sure that this was just a kind of a feel-good feeling, and hopefully it would encourage other people that maybe aren't quite as welcoming and friendly to be so. But anyway, that you answered my question.
Yeah, I would suggest that everybody, all boards take this back to their own board and to decide whether they want to sign or not in its form or make any changes to it. It'd be nice if we had one form that said everybody, but evidently Debbie has some questions on the writing. The language.
And it says town of and village of and
But those are, those can be easily corrected, so, and then have it on one of your agendas and move forward from there. So.
If I could ask, has Saxon River already signed one of these?
No, this is news to my board.
Okay.
And that's the way we roll.
Yeah, we're on the fly.
Okay. Any questions? I think not. Let's move on to the tax sale update. Scott. Yeah.
Put in the working list into your packet so you can see where we are. This will be the master list that we're working with, the attorney on it will now go to the next step in the process. We have to do notices and follow-ups. So,
Scott, if I may, if you could speak more towards the owl, I'm getting complaints on my phone about
Can't hear
that the
me?
volume is horrible.
okay,
The audio is bad, so I don't know what's going on with that TV, but that's what I'm being told.
okay,
Maybe
so
you should move them down and put them in the tables here.
I don't know. I mean, we've got two.
the other thing, I don't know what it does to the camera, but I suppose we can
Oh,
try.
if we move them,
Yeah, we might lose some of
You're
you
not
guys
gonna
out
catch
there.
everybody, right?
that's true. That was the whole point, it's the panoramic, yeah.
Right. So I'll try to speak a little louder. So
Thank you.
basically, this is just our working list as we go forward with our required postings, and then we'll have some follow-up from this. Sometimes this, when they get these official notices, that motivates some people to come clean and get their taxes caught up. And then at a certain point here, there'll be a discussion amongst the boards in terms of if you want to, what your position is on properties, if you're expected or interested in any of these properties, or what you want to do in relationship to things that may or may not go through the sale process and actually be purchased. So right now you can see what we have outstanding. And then this will be the list, like I said, that will start going forward. So there's properties in both, all three communities at this point that are on the list.
No, these are probably people currently do not have an agreement with that.
Correct.
Okay. And what is the blue highlight?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask that.
Yeah,
Thanks.
there's two properties.
Yeah, two properties, yeah,
They
highlighted
might
on the
be,
front page.
I think one of them at least might be tied up in the state. I mean, there's.
Lovely, Austin Lovely, I think Justin there, that's the one that we just took care of, got a 2-year
Correct.
thing, so that's that property.
We had given
Here or something on top of Red Lake Hill.
he had to do a
So
building permit
that's
to
the process.
show that he was in the process, otherwise that property would go to tax sale. And then the other one, I believe, is also a litigation issue as well.
Oh, so we really can't touch them until that is resolved.
I think we're still working with the attorney to see what we can do specifically on that. Those two.
Whoever wants to talk.
The towns surrounding Rockingham seem to do this automatically every year. It just happens. We've been 4 years without a tax sale, and I see people with substantial means on this list who are simply walking away from their responsibility to pay.
Oh, yeah.
All the rest of us are paying for them. So I would like to see this happen every year. Is that possible, Scott?
Anything is possible. That I can tell you, it does take a lot of time and energy, and then the attorney is not free. So there's other costs that go into this as well. But certainly that's something, we did split out some of the responsibilities from the finance director, so they have more time to work on these types of problems. That was one of the issues, why it was difficult.
And the turnover of town managers, because it's actually the town manager is our tax
Right.
So that
So,
kind of
yeah,
adds
I
to the
don't think- yeah, I don't think you'll see the list as large as it is now.
Because the other thing, folks, and we just have one person talking, thanks. The other thing is that it's a 2-year hiatus, that they have to be out 2 years before we could.
Well, that's your current policy, so
So
there's
if you,
always.
you're trying to do that every year, we've got to change the policy or,
How do other towns do it every year then?
They don't
They have
have
their
a
own
2-year.
policy, they do it every year.
Oh, so we could change our
We
policy.
could change, as I said, we'd have to change our policy or stick with what we have and.
Because there's other delinquencies, but they're not on there because they haven't reached that
Right.
2-year mark, so.
So you had a question?
No, I was just gonna say, I'm hearing more conversation. at the end.
That's what I said. Okay, anyone have any other input on the?
So
tax sale
we're,
process?
it's going forward.
Yeah.
Yes, so this is the list that's going forward. The next thing you'll see is the public, there'll be letters sent and public posting.
I have a question about the mobile homes as a separate list.
Yes. We're going to send them letters for collection purposes.
Right.
And then we'll have to have another conversation as we go forward as to how we want to handle those separate. from
They don't
other-
know, do they own the property or not own the properties that go with these? Is that a park?
It depends on the location. But we've had difficulty in the past when we have purchased them or when we bought them and the cost of disposal and the cost of, we get into quite a bit of additional funds.
You mentioned that state program where they could apply for funding from the state. Do we have anybody that was interested?
We have referred at least a half a dozen places back to the state, and they have been contacting us periodically for information. And so far, nobody has been given any relief that I'm aware of. So we have at least made everybody aware of it.
I think we've had some success with that in Jackson's River.
Yeah, oh, good.
It has to be from the individual.
They have to apply.
Yeah.
Which we have let people know, so.
Which is why we stalled a little bit to get this process going, to get the time to respond to us. But now we're just gonna go ahead with it, so. What is your plan? I mean, I don't know.
We put liens on, we were just comparing notes, we put liens on, and recently they seem to be working. I mean, it may be the real estate churning that's happening right now. You know, properties that have been sitting there for a few years are suddenly up for sale, and those liens have to be settled before the sale can go. We certainly have outstanding problems.
Yeah.
Exactly, like what you're describing there.
Okay, anyone else have any comments, questions? Seeing none, let's move on to the discussion of farmers market.
Yeah, I just put this on here just as an informational item because we've been in discussion with the folks that run the market about locations, and it's come up in a couple of different places. They weren't real happy with the way things have been going in the current location, and we're doing all that construction. And so we're looking at some alternatives. We've talked to the hydro about possibly using some of that property and then trying to bring the market into that area. Until they get their FERC licensing, they were not going to give us permission to do that. They've had their FERC application since April of last year in Washington. And at this point, they say it could be another year until they hear back in terms of the final disposition. So at this point, that's probably not a realistic place. So then you look at Hetty Green, and then the other option that Gary and I were talking about, we're talking to the fire department, is can we somehow accommodate some of this with the new Memorial Park? There's some sensitivity to that because again, it's an activity that may or may not work at that location. So those conversations are still ongoing, hasn't been decided, but.
Because there's not a lot of room in the park for tables and tents, 10 by 10s. That area there, plus trash is always an issue no matter where they are. And getting some efficient.
And also you have the traffic issue because people that start to 4, I believe 4 to 7, I think it is. And you got people coming in on the way home from work, trying to get the post office, get the mail. And we all know that people don't want to walk here to that table, to park their car and get the stuff out. They're gonna be parked on the sidewalk and blocking traffic, all coming from quotas and everything else coming. I can just see a traffic fiasco in that area right there with across the post office.
So we're still looking at options. Just want to give you guys a heads up as to where that is.
Fine.
Yes.
Do you think it could work in the meadow down by the vista?
Would anybody go down there?
Access, that's the problem.
If it's not being seen, it makes it very difficult.
Yeah,
for
I
us
know.
to get-
I mean,
we
you have to
want
really,
Yeah,
really promote it.
yeah, that's a tough one because you just don't see it.
But there is parking and everything down there. It's a big
Yeah.
area.
What about the recreational rec department up to the playground?
That's kind of out of sight.
Sort of out of sight.
Yeah.
The other option they've asked us about
What
is
they call the
66
bucket
seconds.
parking lot. I don't know why that's parking there.
I think we spent enough time.
That'd be a little premature, yeah.
Yeah, just sort of let that go.
Parking lot.
Yeah, the Buckley lot there. I mean, there's parking there. It's right next to canal. I mean, just a thought. And then they got park on one side and string your tents down the other side.
That's a more visible location.
Right.
Yeah. So we're still working on it, so we'll come back, but I just want to give you a heads up because it's been sort of, you know.
Okay, anybody else? Any comments?
Just a question, was it at one time at the Hetty Green Park?
It was for a couple of years.
And was it successful there?
Ask Gary, he was running it. Or sort of running it.
There's challenges with the site. The vendors are running it there. This year, they are looking at Hetty Green, the meadow down by the river, next to the riverfront park. They talked about a few different places. Hetty Green specifically, there's some trouble with traffic, both the corner where there's unloading. For a couple of weeks, the parking lot's full of school while the farmers are coming in to unload. It's a tough intersection driving out of. I don't think there were any accidents through the few years, but there were some complaints. It did work. It did work. It was more visible than any other site they've been. except pre-Vilas Bridge, the waypoint, I think was a little better, but just because of traffic circulation. But it was a nice site. They liked the green space. Families would come for picnics a lot, and the music was good there. Or
Put in 66 Atkinson Street. Parking would definitely be a problem.
that was their first question.
And it's not completed lot.
Right.
No, not a complete lot.
The other thing they had up to a TD Bank was trash, because what we were getting was, besides the litter and trash that we got there, we also had some of the neighbors were.
Household trash.
When dumping the household trash, so, I think the town was picking up the bill to get rid of the trash.
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
the farmer's market, so that was another thing.
I don't think of those.
I may be wrong on that now.
The farmer's market definitely brought their own trash and took it out, and they did around and cleaned up anything they saw, wrappers, cigarette butts, kid stuff.
One of the owners who lives up on that corner, the apartments there, has to put a lock on his dumpster because they'll come and dump their household trash from other people who live in the apartment buildings on the street. Will go and put it in the dumpster. So he has a lock on it. So, then finding people overfilling the dog bag bucket and then the other bucket and then leaving stuff around the bucket. I mean, a few years ago before COVID, that was a problem.
Big problem. Not only here, Westminster has the same problem.
Yeah, don't want to take it.
Roadside dumping has become a real problem right now, everywhere. And a $1,500 fine goes a long ways to paying for disposal costs. When you get caught, all it takes is a license plate number.
Yeah, that's it.
And people are foolish enough to leave their mail in the bags when they throw it away.
I remember the police.
All you gotta do is pull it out, you can find out who it belongs to real quick.
Check the address.
Anyway, all right, this next one is a village issue, I believe, a utility billing penalties resolution.
Don't normally like to do this at the joint board, but it was a sort of a timing issue, and for the village folks, the issue is, under the Vermont statutes, penalties and interest are really applicable to property tax, but the penalty provision is not applicable to utilities. And VLCT's had some findings on that, and we've been working on some updates as to some of our agreements, so the statute is pretty clear as to what the requirements are for overdue charges for water and sewer. So,
I'd like to ask why, for decades, we've had penalties attached to our water bills. It was an 8% penalty, which was nonstop, halted until COVID for 2 years. But my concern about not giving a penalty is that people can say, well, why should I even pay it? And then we get later and later user fees unpaid because there's no stick, basically, to get them to pay the bill on time. So I didn't understand why we can't go back to what we were doing before in order to use it as an incentive to pay the bill on time.
there's no statutory authority under Vermont state law to charge penalties on overdue water or sewer charges.
So are we in violation for the last multiple decades for doing it in the first place?
The sad answer, yes.
Now, how are we supposed to get the bills paid?
Shut the water off.
More aggressive collections and more aggressive shut-offs.
So Scott, what are you looking, Mr. Manager, to entertain a motion?
I just want, yes, for the board to understand that and pass that so that there's an understanding.
All right, I'll make the motion with also Board of Trustees in reference to the utilities and arrears, adopt the statute for application to the utility bills of, as it's stated in 24 VSA section 5151C.
Give a second. Any further discussion on the fees and penalties? Go ahead.
So, just so I clearly understand it, so on C, so there's no, under the statute, you can't require penalty,
Apparently, according to that.
but you can accrue interest.
Correct.
Is that, am I reading this properly?
Always interest, and the interest is specified. It's the same interest that you can charge on an overdue account.
Just like taxes?
Taxes.
Okay.
And you can charge penalty on taxes. You cannot charge penalty on utilities.
Okay.
So we can continue with the interest.
Right, not the penalty.
Not the rate.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to.
So did I get a second?
Yeah.
Yes, you Jeff second. Okay, so any further discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Even though I'd like to, I said aye. So we're past.
It wasn't my idea.
I get it, but like I said.
Thanks a lot,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, shoot. Sorry about that.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that in future years, or even like this year, we're going to see a higher delinquent list because of that.
Well, the idea there is I would be working with Brian and folks to do more of that.
We got Brian out there with that joystick.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. Just turning that thing close.
Yeah, follow the process though. Don't jump the shark too quick before you end up getting in trouble. You've been out there shutting water off and it wasn't legal. Some instances. So make sure you follow the process.
We know nothing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, yeah, review agenda items for our next joint board meeting, which I believe may be June 28th, if I'm looking at the Tuesday.
There's one in May?
Gary mentioned.
Is it right, May?
You mentioned May, I don't know where.
Well,
3 months
there is
from today.
5 Tuesdays in May. So,
There are
yeah,
5 Tuesdays in May.
The 31st would actually be the next potential meeting.
Okay, so potentially May 31st.
Correct. Which makes sense because of what we're trying to get with the ARPA.
Mhm.
It lines up with that.
So I'm assuming we'll have ARPA conversations,
Yes.
there'll be more tax sale information.
Yes.
I'd like to revisit the declaration.
You see what we did or didn't do? Is that what you're saying?
I have an item for it too.
What's that?
I'd like to add that we revisit the fire committee in reference to the 3 items that we talked about a couple meetings back. I can bust them if you want.
That'd be great. No, not to list them, but to revisit it.
Yeah.
Do you remember the date of that meeting? I guess I can go through the minutes. It's easy enough to find.
Oh, the last one.
Last part.
There was
No,
Joint meeting?
no, like 2 joint meetings ago.
We talked about it in November.
Yeah,
It was
okay.
November, I think it was that one or the one before.
Yeah.
But I had brought up for the committee, which I know they've been working on, but it's been a while. Appropriations, what they recommended for funding the equipment fund, updates on how the town of Rockingham should build a village of Saxon River for the fire equipment, and what was the last thing? Oh, the updated list of what equipment is eligible
For what?
under the use of
Oh,
equipment
under
fund.
the full list of what's.
Right.
what's-
So there's update the list that's
funding.
26 years old. Basically, update the, continue to work on the policy that was 26 years old.
Right.
And never been reviewed.
When does our consultant start working on the fire department issues?
I believe, and I'll look for Jamie and the Saxon River folks on the study for
The
your.
feasibility study,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna look towards Gary.
Okay, we're looking around.
Or
We
haven't heard anything, correct?
So the feasibility study that we're funded and working on finding a consultant is the Main Street, the west end of Main Street in Saxon's River.
Right.
The fire station grant, we haven't heard from the USDA yet. The earliest they respond to those is April, sometimes it's June before we hear from them.
I'm sorry, my question was wrong. I thought, Sean, maybe we were talking about how the fire departments were gonna figure out how to be more efficient and we got a consultant coming in.
That, I believe that would be tied into that.
Correct.
That Gary's talking about.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
They got to study the runs, they got to study times that these guys are out of service, and then look at equipment,
Everything
everything.
out of the picture.
And that will happen when?
April to June.
April, May, or
Well,
June.
we'd asked for a grant, so we're hoping to hear, all right, late spring. Was all they give us, it's a deadline, as a time.
All right.
A window. yes.
A window.
Yes.
But under other business, Sean is here to talk about something related to
Okay.
that, but we'll hit it into other business. So-
Okay.
We have order bills and watch it.
Yep, we all set there? Okay, let's move on to review order bills and warrants.
Motion to approve.
There are 2 sets here. There
just happened.
is a set for both
is it?
boards to sign
Oh, I
and
have
one for the select board. It's coming around on the
Oh.
select board, so
it. You're gonna have to-
take a motion.
So moved. Oh, you need the
Their
select
side.
board.
They will do our side.
So here a second.
Second.
Any good discussion? Seeing none, hearing none? All those in favor would say aye. Aye.
Okay, we don't have ours yet to make sure we've done all fine, but,
They're coming around.
I need a motion to approve bills and warrants for the trustees.
Motion to approve orders, bills, and warrants.
And a second.
Second.
Okay. And we haven't seen them, so do we really, are we ready to?
Oh, we're in.
Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And as soon as, okay, so
They're right there.
as soon as it comes around.
Bring them right around, and then we're gonna pass.
And I presume Secretary doesn't have. We have some. Yeah.
Okay, other business, let's start with the Saxon River crew. Ellen? Any?
Nope, not that I can.
Carl?
No.
Amy?
That's it.
Jeff?
All set.
Stefan?
Oh, I think it's just wonderful. We can all get together here tonight for this tri-board meeting. It's wonderful.
Hey, I should have said, thank you for the seat at the table.
Yeah. And you're welcome.
It's good to have you here.
I agree. Yeah.
This is 2 in a row they made now. This is history being made here.
I
The
know.
lights are on, the heat's working.
By the way, I fixed, the lights are fixed. I
Yeah.
was hoping somebody would notice that.
All right.
It's bright in here, yeah.
Yeah, well,
It's on and the lights work. What else do you want?
yeah, they work. Super. Wait, yeah,
Yeah, the only thing I was gonna mention under other business, kind of going back to what you're probably gonna talk about in a minute with the fire chief, was that I was very disappointed with the Rockingham Select Board at the meeting where they did approve the $5,000 in the study for the fire study. I thought that was, personally out of line and didn't think that there was a whole lot of thought put into it before you pulled the trigger and warranted or gave the $5,000. I know that meeting, Peter asked some questions, but nobody else did, so. That's all I got.
Okay, good.
I'm good.
Debbie?
I think I'm, yes.
One thing I'd mention, everybody saw that Route 12 fiasco going on. Looks like a more longer detour going on, maybe for another year or two.
Yeah.
They put this project on the 10-year plan, and we all know what happens with a 10-year plan. Just look at the Violet Bridge.
That
That'll tell you
lines up.
where that goes.
Edge, yeah.
Yeah, so.
Debbie had an idea to write it on the letter.
Yeah, I'll write another letter.
Well, it is, they're gonna patch it up and let people go that way, so I don't know how anybody in their right mind is gonna take that road with the.
I would.
There's a speed bump in the railroad track, I understand now. There's a dip, so they slow the railroad track, plus if you get heavy traffic over there, it's gonna deteriorate further, and somebody's either gonna end up in the river, there's gonna be a bad accident up there, but that's New Hampshire. So,
But yeah, did you write the state about that or
We are continuing that dialogue.
Okay.
yes. So I've had them out. We're in a disagreement. I'm going to continue to have them come out and we'll keep elevating it through other levels of government to one of those drugs on.
They use an awful lot of words to say no.
yeah,
Just saying.
It's amazing.
but it is confusing, because the guy keeps going back to the Axe Bridge is the problem, and no, it's not. The
No.
cause of the destruction of the rural Rockingham Highway Street is
It's-
not the
it's-
Axe Bridge,
it's
it's the
12.
traffic that's being rerouted through town
Yeah.
because of the detour on Route 12.
Wow.
But they, somebody's got a line block there, I guess. I
Yeah.
don't know, I have to read the email today. So, Bonnie.
No.
There.
I don't think I've got, I don't know if anybody has taken a look at the old gatehouse in Miners Pond lately. The last time I'd seen it, the roof looked like it was just about that point where it's ready to give up the ghost, so might be worthwhile looking at, doing some repairs on that if you want to preserve it. Because
Scott, a historic preservation people are supposed to be there.
Walter's been working on some things with that. I'm trying to help us with that.
Rick, anything?
I just want to understand Wade's comment about the disappointment with the select board. I didn't follow.
You want me to respond?
No, I don't know.
I think you need
understand
to
what you're
clarify
saying.
what you're talking about.
I was talking about the meeting where the select board granted the $5,000 to Saxon River to help fund their feasibility study for their fire department.
But they're also looking at aren't they also looking
I
at
thought-
our needs for
I thought
Rockingham
it's all three-
too?
I thought it was all three fires.
Yeah, it's all-
That was for the.
It is, but there was no request from anybody else to do, it was just, this was a request from them to help with their study that they needed to be able to apply for grants for their fire station.
Oh, okay, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
So why,
So the town of Rockingham offered $5,000 for something that the townspeople really have no responsibility over.
Well, can I speak to that?
That's my point.
Oh, okay. I didn't
I'm not
know.
saying I'm opposed to the study or whatever.
Okay,
And if they need a feasibility study, no different than if the town did or if the village did, it. We certainly would, you do what you got to do to become qualified for grants. I get that. But for the town to just say, yeah, we'll give you $5,000 towards this, I thought was not the best way of doing business.
I'm gonna let Ellen respond to that.
Yeah, just for clarification, no money has been exchanged.
I know that.
It's just, if we get approved for this feasibility study, it's gonna come back to the boards to decide in the fire department, to decide, do we want to pursue this? And if so, then we do need the money. We just had to have an obligation that if we get approved, are there funds available?
But my point is, the town of Rockingham taxpayers should not have to pick up the tab for the village of Saxon River process to become eligible to apply for grants. That's my whole point.
Right, but Saxon.
It's not
River
our
should-
responsibility. It's not the town taxpayers' responsibility and the village of All Swallows. No more than it is you to give us $5,000 for the opposite thing. So that's where I'm coming from.
Okay.
And I understand that this is all, it may or may not even happen. I get that. And
Gary, can you clarify that? I think the whole thing was that the town had to apply for the grant. Is that correct?
Yeah. we
Not the
can do it
village,
as a
because
village.
I questioned, that was part of that question was, why wasn't the village on their own applying? And there was some tie-in because the town had to apply for them, which we trusted we had a resolution passed that if it came to that, they would get $5,000.
So,
Just for clarification.
it's true that the basis of the application was, because Saxon's River is looking to, potentially to the USDA Community Facilities Program, for a fire station. In order to do that, they have to prove that it makes sense, that it's feasible. And Saxon's River is in the town of Rockingham, and the town is eligible for USDA Community Facilities, Saxon's River is not. And the reason that it made sense for the Rockingham Select Board, the case that was put forward is the assessment of the building a fire station showing that it's feasible involves looking at Rockingham and Saxon's River fire stations. What are the response times for everyone they serve? And are the two stations in the right place? The amount of equipment each one, is it the right equipment? Is it the right split? The amount of personnel, the overlap, or a total assessment of what makes the most sense for serving that fire districts. Maybe the Rockingham one is not in the right place. Maybe they should be merged to have in the same place. We don't know the answers to that, but that has to be shown in order for grants to pay for a fire station. You have to prove that it makes sense. So this assessment is assessing Rockingham as much as Saxon's River.
Which is why I, as a select board member, voted yes.
Same was me, yeah.
well, my point of the matter is that had they not come forth, it's not like the town was looking to do this. That's my whole point. Nobody was breathing down the throat of anybody to have this done. I'm not opposed to it. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
But still, even having said that, Saxon River is the one that should foot the bill for it, not the town of Rockingham taxpayers. If it does proceed, because it's not our response, it's nothing to us.
Well, it is, because
No, it's
we,
not. Only
Rockingham
because they
invests,
came forth.
we invest a lot into the fire department. We want it to work.
Who in the
most
town of
efficiently.
Rockingham was requesting this to be done at the time, prior to this becoming
Before
onto
we
the
get,
table?
before we get too far down the road, wait, before we get down the road, let's control this discussion a little bit
I'm
here.
just saying, nobody was, I didn't hear anything about it.
Well, those falls would be just very delighted to have the rest of Rockingham support our buildings
Well, we come
as well. So just keep that in the back of your mind.
This is
We,
not
just our
We have,
decision. This is gonna be presented to everybody. It's not, Saxon's River is not gonna say, you're gonna all buy, pay for our fire department. That's not what it is. This feasibility study, we will assess it. I mean, if we get approved for the feasibility study, then it goes before everybody to decide, do we want to proceed?
Can I just remind people that Saxon River residents pay Rockingham taxes?
We
So
do.
it is not as if, I mean, the money's coming out of them as well. So
Well, it's coming out of.
But it's
it's coming out of
but-
the- it's coming out of the whole town.
Yeah,
overall
the
town.
town. Saxon
Okay,
River Village
that's true,
residents.
but that's also a
If
village,
if you're a Bellas Falls taxpayer,
right?
okay, we've put the entire bill
For
for
our
the
stuff.
Rockingham fire.
Yes, but
Except for the equipment.
For the village.
Well, we
exactly,
put-
yeah.
Yeah, and that's, we understand how the Rockingham is, but for the village of Saxon River, that's the village of Saxon River.
Right.
Right.
So,
I think Sean's gonna have, go ahead, Sue.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it's something that's benefiting the whole town of Rockingham as well, and it's, we don't know yet, and I can see your point, but we're not funding their fire station, we're funding a study that will also help the town of Rockingham understand.
that's fine.
If we get approved.
If we get approved.
Yeah, we'll have that further conversation when that happens.
Yeah, right.
Because then it could be voted down by everybody.
Sean, you've been sitting over there patient with a grimy face. So why don't you come right up to the docket here and lay it on us? I'm not gonna touch the study. Oh, come on.
I will say that I've lived through two studies in Bellas Falls, and both of them, I think they spent 15,000 on one and 10 on another, and I think that they went absolutely nowhere. So,
And they were paid by the village of Bellas Falls.
but my point is, with that is, if you're going to pay for it, there will be some tough decisions that may come out of that.
Yeah.
And you should be prepared to move forward with those or not.
Right.
Um,
And that's something we have to decide if we get approved for the feasibility, if we agree to fund it.
But I'm not here to talk about that. I am here to talk about the staffing. And this is not, I want to make it clear, this is not a dig at any department. It's not, I mean, every department has, a lot of committed members, egos, ours included. But the reality is that the daytime coverage is really lacking for all three departments. Some are better than others, but it's just difficult to get people during the day. And I think one of the things that needs to be discussed is a policy that where we can use town and or village employees to help supplement the staff during the day. I'm certainly not looking to restaff the fire department. What we need are people that are able to leave their jobs during the day to help out at a call. Everybody wants to go to a structure fire, as bizarre as that sounds. Like that's what gets people, that's what gets firefighters motivated. That's what brings people in. It's the mundane, everyday calls that that people have that the departments have a hard time getting people to go for. There are right now, I think there are six employees of the highway department that are part of fire departments. There's 3 belong to Bellas Falls, 3 belong to Rockingham. One of those members is actually belongs to both. But there's no clear. There's a little bit of a rough draft that kind of says this is what you can go for, this is what you can't go for. It does cause some friction. I will say that I've talked to Andy before this meeting, just to tell him I was coming here. And Andy and I have a great working relationship, and I will call him if something's going on to see if we can free people up. And most of the time he can, but it's not always. But it also does cause some friction between some of the other employees because they feel like that they should be able to leave for whatever reason, I guess, as well. It just is nothing set in stone. And I did a real quick study just of the last 9 months, for at least for Bellas Falls, I just went from July 1st, just because we haven't been working on this fiscal year, up until the current date. And out of 203 calls, 68 occurred during the Monday through Friday time slot between 7 and 4. From the highway department, we use 15 man hours, which I don't think is a lot over a 9-month period. One of the local businesses who are 3 of our members are work at one local business. They actually provided 19 man hours during the day. So one of the complaints, which I know that Scott has heard from this business owner, is, you know, if the town isn't going to work with us, why should I lose the man hours, pay them to be there, and then pay them overtime? Because these guys, when they're done from the call, they don't just, if it's at the end of the day, they don't go home. They will have to go back out and complete their job. So not only does he lose the time, he pays the employees, but also pays the employees overtime to go back and do this. So I think it's a really good morale thing. I don't think it's a very costly thing. The biggest thing that you're going to see that's detrimental to this is you may see some projects that at the highway department that get delayed. So if they're out painting lines, and it happens to be they do that in the spring typically, that can be brush fire season, that may get delayed a little bit. So I think that those are the complaints that you'll have to deal with. I certainly think that if you tripled the amount of time, you're talking a week and a half worth of time that gets lost. And I think that this should be used to benefit all 3 departments, not just, I'm just here speaking on Bell Falls, but I know that it's difficult for all 3 departments to do that. So I think it's a good time for you guys to think about this, especially with the study coming up, and maybe revisit it back at the next tri-board meeting. But I just wanted to bring that to your attention to think about it.
Yep.
I have, just a couple comments. Number one, is that we have union agreements to be concerned with, and that could be part of the friction problem, because you have people who are all union, and some of them are looking for fire, and some of them have to stay put.
I think
So
it's more high
there are
school
issues,
stuff.
I get that. Secondly, I worked for many years for a fire company, as you well are aware, and our policy was, we had a policy that they were allowed to leave work when they got a tone. They went out to do that job, they came back, put up their turnip gear, and went back to work. And they put in the hours. We didn't pay them for leaving. We paid them for their hours as they needed to do, and everyone got their work done. Now, that doesn't work the same way when you've got CBAs to deal with. But something like that, basically, it's a trust factor. We knew they were leaving for a fire. We knew they'd come back and complete their job, and we kept them to their word, and they did their job. So that worked. And we had, I don't know, sometimes 3 or 4 at a time who would leave based upon a fire call, and but it worked. And it is something that is tough, but we need to look at how that would work here. If we do need to fill the gaps, we don't want to structure fire that becomes a fatal. Because of the
But isn't part of the, can
Yeah, go ahead.
isn't part of the underlying problem here also is when they do return, for those that are members, they're being, I don't want to use the word harassed, but
Oh, absolutely.
they're being questioned,
Absolutely.
like, you
Absolutely.
know,
Yes.
which I would think that we would be thankful that we have some people that want to do both.
Yes.
That's my take. But
Absolutely.
Where's that Amy? Your hands up first, so then that one.
So Shirley, do we know what other towns of similar size do with this problem?
You know, I never want to reference other towns, so I won't, but I will say in other towns. So it's typically what you'll find is that it will be, you know, a couple of people that are self-employed that put a lot of time and energy into their department. So other towns are luckier than ours. We do have our own ups, you know, we do have our beneficial, you know, together, not gonna use the word merge at all, but if we worked better together, that's one option, is just, we don't have to merge, we don't have to become one big department, but if we just work better together, and if you look around, if you look at, say, Walpole, Westminster, and Rockingham, geographically, they're kind of the same. The only difference between the three towns is, I'm gonna say, we have three fire departments. So that is it. And I'm not suggesting that we merge everything. Maybe just work better together. And trust me, there's things that we can do better in Bells Falls to help that, and we're willing to do that. But it has to be a group effort. But that's a bigger hurdle, and something I think the boards have to do is more than.
Oh, I get questions.
Yeah, well, I meant to talk to you about this before because, and I'm not speaking as a trustee, I'm speaking as an employee of Chroma. Chroma encourages employees to get involved in the community. And what happens is, because of the structure of Chroma, it's employee owned, whatever. And I thought about it, I don't know if anybody at Chroma is a volunteer fire member.
Not that I'm aware of.
And I thought, maybe not just for Chroma, but other large businesses in town, we've got Sonex, we've got Whitney Lake. If there was some kind of collaboration with the fire departments to get more employees involved, I'm not speaking to those other two companies, but in terms of Chroma, because what happens also is employees at Chroma, when they donate or volunteer their time, Chroma makes a donation in that employee's name for the amount of hours that they have spent at that organization or helping that organization. So maybe we could talk more about that and find out who, they're just not, people just may not be aware.
And one of the biggest obstacles is the training. So to become in the village, in order to be a tier firefighter, we require you to be a firefighter 1, which is about 150 hours. So it's 6 months of your life, and it's as someone gets older and they become more involved with family and other commitments, it's really hard for someone to take that time out of their schedule. What Mike Stack was talking about, I spoke with him last Friday about a job shadowing thing. I talked to the manager briefly about it, but I think that is one of the keys is getting the people when they're younger, when they have the time to do this. If there's a way that we can, get them trained so that by the time that they graduate, it's difficult because with the fire academy, you have to be 18 to take firefighter 1. So we'd have to figure a way, work with the fire academy to do that, so they became certified when they left. If we could do that, that's huge, because even if they did get certified and then, took off and went to college, at least that's ingrained in them. And when they come back, hopefully they come back, we can maybe pick up where they left off. So it's really important to get them while they're younger. But it's tough.
I know I thought myself about volunteering, but I was like, well, if I run into a building, they're gonna probably help me out.
John, could you just touch, if you know, the average age of the responders? You and I have talked about it.
It's up there. It's I don't know what the average age is, but I would say that in BF, and I'm probably being generous, it's probably 40, maybe a little bit higher than that.
That's not as high as I thought you were gonna say.
So part of the problem is if you look at the guys that are my phone is starting to blow up. I'm probably getting texts from the guys.
Yeah, I can hear you.
But it's probably a little bit higher than that. So I know that the officers in our department, 3 of them are 2 of us are 50, one's mid-40s. So it's difficult because it's about the experience. It's about getting to know the job. So the younger guys, it's great to have the younger guys there. They don't have that experience, and it's not as busy as it used to be back in the 80s, 90s.
Wait, so back to the policy.
Yes.
Or you mentioned that maybe there should be. So Two-part question. I'm assuming that the town of Rockingham or the village doesn't have a policy that talks about allowing their employees to go to calls.
There is one that's very loose.
Is it written?
It is a written policy. But it's, I think it needs to be revisited.
So my thought would be, could you and potentially the two other fire chiefs and or the manager either through the three of you or through the committee or the fire committee, or come back at the next joint meeting with a draft policy that covers taking care of what you're requesting,
Or maybe sooner to the individual boards.
or the outdoor sooner.
The other thing too, you gotta think about it, is a personnel policy.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's tied into the whole thing, so they're gonna have to check again with that, because the union is involved with that.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah, you're reading great.
and you've gotta be careful where you tread down that path. so you're
But
gonna-
instead of just, I think if you, I mean, I'm fine with you folks, however you see fit, coming up with a draft policy that covers, that talks to this, and
Yeah.
takes care of that issue.
Yeah, as far as grievances go, I think that what you touched on with the harassment that goes on, that actually
Well,
has a
that's-
potential to have a better potential for grievances
Yeah,
than us leaving for,
What
guys
is-
leaving for fire calls.
we don't have an emotional file that you can use to take the edges off these guys.
No,
That relationship stuff is unfortunately another problem
it is.
that exists within the system.
Yep.
That has nothing to do with what we say.
I'd also be interested in a little bit of background for what's happening over time in terms of fires. Are they the same kinds of fires? You referenced the 80s and 90s.
It's not, you don't see the structure fires that you used to anymore. I mean, it tends to be, it goes in ebbs and flows. It's not, it's not like you have them 1 or 2 a year. I mean, it's, the last one in the village was, in July of 2020, I believe.
So it's
but-
mostly brush fires, motor vehicle accidents?
Well, there's car accidents, sometimes brush fires, but there's a lot of, it's Saxon River. So we went out there a couple weeks ago for the water leak at the school. It was basically myself and Walter Healy that dealt with that. And Walter, I think you all know Walter. I love Walter to death. But he was up in full turnout gear, up in the attic space of the school. That's not where he should be. I mean, that should be a job for a younger person. Those are some of the concerns, some of the things to think about. And again, it's not, there's a bunch of committed guys out there. Their jobs don't allow them to come in during the day. That's the biggest problem.
It seems, from when I'm in the rig or at night, the house, majority of the calls are medical calls.
What's that in the?
As far as emergency response.
And I don't even, if we have a medical call in the village, it's typically a code or something like that. And those aren't the ones, I'm not worried about those. I can handle those on my own, or someone can come in for that. It's sometimes it's alarm investigations. It's, we went to Saxon River a few years ago. Well, we went to Saxon River a few years ago to the Warner Center for a smoke detector something. We actually got there just before Walter did. And we got there was smoke coming off the eaves. And it was actually someone left. So it sounds like a mundane thing. It sounds like, they're just going out for a smoke detector signing. 90% of the time, that's all it is. It's that, that one time where somebody doesn't take it seriously, and you get there and it's, and it's a potential problem.
And there's no way to figure out necessarily like what the average time spent on a call, like a certain type of call, so that people would have an understanding of this is what I'll have to commit.
I would say less than an hour. That's
Seems totally manageable.
Yeah, that's 90% of the time, that's what we spend on the calls, about an hour.
Yeah, it's not unreasonable.
When you go into a fire, you may be there depending on if it's a structure fire or a brush fire. wetting down, you could be there longer, but most of the time, I would say an hour or less is what we're using. people for.
But on most given days, the question at hand is that there's at least a few other hands available.
Yes.
Most of the time.
Yes.
It's just a matter of having a policy that allows them to come and do what they need to do for an hour or two or 10 minutes. Most of the time, like I said, it's less than an hour.
Yeah.
And then go back to work without getting harassed.
Yeah, and in the
Basically.
when the changeover first happened in Bells Falls, we had an influx of new guys. They were excited. They were abusing, they were obviously, definitely coming to calls that they probably didn't need to, or we didn't need all of them to come to. So that caused a little bit of friction, but that was 4 years ago. We addressed that problem. We've dealt with it. Now they come in and they go right back to work when they're called. So, and it's not just about specific towns. It's also, if we go mutual aid, some people get frustrated when we go mutual aid, but if you're gonna go to, say, Putney or Westminster or Keene or Brattleboro, if you have an incident, you're gonna want, the same response from them that they expect from you.
Right.
So it goes both ways.
Anybody else got anything? If not, we'll move to, no need for an executive session, so I'll take a motion to the magical adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you for your time.